about how you conceptualize of this common human thread, and why are you so fascinated by it?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, to talk about how I conceptualize it, it almost feels to me more like a river, or like there's a flow of energy that happens between us. And not to sound so, esoteric about it, but I think we step into it most often in moments where we're kind of silent, or we're not bound by language. This has been my experience in working with so many different people that I couldn't communicate with. And in spite of not being able to actually like mentally connect through, ideas and language, we were still able to have these beautiful moments of connection. And that to me is stepping into that shared thread. And I talk a little bit in the book about my neighbor Rangina, but when I moved to LA, I was living in a little studio apartment, and my neighbor across the way, she was Afghani, couldn't speak almost any English. I mean, she just was like hello, and she could say hello and come over here, but it was just come. you know and during that time that I lived there, I had dinner with her probably 3 nights a week, and we would just sit in like this beautiful silence, where she's prepared a meal for me, and you could feel the generosity and the kindness and the warmth and the connection without any language. And that to me is kind of the heart of what it means to step into that thread of human connection. Is it's very accessible, but sometimes we almost mentally block it. But if you take away the mental things like language and ideas, and actually just have shared experiences, it's really hard to deny.
Yeah, absolutely. With taking out this mental piece of the picture, right? Because of course, one of the parts of the book that I really love is how you do integrate the esoteric with some of these more grounded academic concepts. And you mentioned earlier, you're an academic by trade, you're a teacher, and bridging the gap between these kind of, I hesitate. I don't really like the phrase New Age because I think so much of it is actually about returning to ancient and indigenous practices.
Yeah.
But for lack of a better term, New Age and kind of metaphysical practices with grounded scientific practices. Can you talk to me about why it is in this intersection between like kind of removing the language, linguistic, descriptive, maybe more structured academic sense of experience?
Mhm.
Why is that where this sense of humanness arises? And yet we're still kind of bound by our brain, right?
For
And
sure.
being within that. So, yeah, talk to me a little bit about that liminality and why that's where you feel, and you see this experience arise.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking a really good, expansive question. So let me break it down in terms of how I see it, and I'm going to use my coaching frameworks for this. So, the way that we tend to think about ourselves, and I'll speak from a Western culture perspective, is we see ourselves as sort of our mind, which we know through our language, our ideas, our bodies, which is all about like our action, and ability to actually like do things, and our hearts. So that's all about our emotions. But outside of all of those things, we have these characteristics in us that long for meaning and purpose and joy and contribution. And how do you explain what courage is, and our need for creativity, all these things that don't fit into those buckets. And that's because, in my opinion, there's a fourth aspect of us that we don't conceptualize this so much, and that's what I call the innate self, or the spiritual self. But I intentionally wanted to create new language around it because I think people sort of fall into one or two camps around the ideas of spirituality. They're either like totally bought in and they have a belief system and or a practice, or they don't. And because they may be more analytical, and I've worked with a lot of highly analytical people who are like, well, I don't know what my belief system is, so I don't think I'm spiritual. And I want to break that down. Like we have four aspects of us: our mind, our heart, our body, and our spirit. And that spirit is the being part. And so you ask, like, why is it outside of sort of language and constructs that we tap into that? It's because it is being. It is when we are in nature. We connect with these moments, right? When you're in nature and you just quiet your mind a little bit, or through mindful practice, there's a lot of research on that. Just the sense of feeling connected to something bigger than yourself, connecting to one another, it sits in that space outside of mind. And I think that's so hard for us, in our culture, and in Western culture particularly, because we're so attached to mind.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think it's important just to kind of push against it a little bit, just to create a little space to see and or feel something, maybe a little different.
Yeah, totally. I completely agree that it is so hard for us to kind of, it's almost like let go to step into it, right? That in, like you said at the very beginning of that answer, the from this Western framework, right? I think there is something very Western about stepping into the analytical mind and like, okay, but how do I understand this? Can I put together a philosophical proof of all of the things? And yet you can't categorize or describe these certain things. Um, what is it, in your opinion, that draws us, because like you said, we have this innate drive towards meaning and purpose and the big questions, the mystery, as I like to call it.
Mhm.
What is it that, I guess I'll ask a twofold question, drives us towards that and that curiosity, but also keeps us in wanting to analyze and explain it and not just allowing it to be mysterious?
Yeah, I mean, we are in and of ourselves an ecosystem, right? We're like a whole integrated being. And so emotions are even kind of hard to detangle from our thoughts, and definitely from our bodies. It all coexists, and yet there are distinctions. And I think that is a part of what, my hope is, that we can understand sort of the distinction of our innate self, which just the innate stands for like our higher nature that has 8 characteristics. But it's also innate in all of us. And regardless of culture or any of that, it's just like a human, it's the divinity in us, right? And so I think there's something really powerful about recognizing that, but also, yeah, we need to understand things. Like, that's also how we're programmed. And I think, to me, the power of understanding how our minds work from more of a holistic lens is to recognize, like, our minds naturally are trying to protect us. Like, that's what they do. I mean, they are there to help make sure that they're like incredible tools, but they can wield power for us or against us. And that is just a hard thing to reconcile. And I talk a lot about the mind, in the beginning, just around, like, I think I call it our frenemy, because I think it unlocks so many things for us. And the power of our thinking, it really creates a lot of our world, but it's like a pair of glasses that you can't take off. And just because you see something a particular way doesn't mean that's how it is. And so I think the more we can understand some of the limitations of the mind, we can create some space to experience something outside of it. And that's my hope. Because I do feel like, to your question around, I feel like we are drawn towards meaning, and purpose. And it's interesting. I talked a little bit about this, just in terms of working with executives. One of the things that was so powerful to me, and part of what led me to write this book, is that at the end of these conversations with executives who are talking about, how do I make my team more impactful? How do I be more impactful? Productivity, productivity, productivity. There would become this moment, if we work together long enough, where they would start to say, but I just don't know what it means, or I just don't know if I'm actually making a difference in the world, or am I really helping people? Or I feel like I have so much more to offer, and I just don't feel like I'm able to do it. And there were these deep personal questions that people want to, if they allow themselves to go there, want to answer. But I think we hold ourselves back sometimes from it because we're afraid of where it might lead us. And that's the mind trying to protect us, right? So, yeah, I think we do have an internal compass, and that's the way I think of the innate self. Is it's our compass if we tap into it, and it will lead us towards things that we feel called in, and to use our gifts and to use our talents. But it's that small, quiet voice. It's not the one that's super loud in our brains. As I talk about our internal roommates that live in our mind, it's not. It's not there.
Yeah, yeah. I love the frenemy comparison because it's both our gateway into understanding, but
Yeah.
also the thing that keeps us from being able to be within the whole. And that's something you talk about, like the individual versus the universal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how having a self is the thing that allows you to experience it all, but it's also the thing that prevents you from being in the universal innateness
Yeah.
of it all. You said something that I think is so fascinating, and I agree with, in that it is our mind trying to protect us. And I think, I mean, we all, with all of the beautiful new research that's coming out around psychology and how anxiety and all sorts of different, mental experiences that we have. I say anxiety because it's closest for
There
me
you
to
go.
grab
Yeah.
onto, right? That it's actually a holdover from back in the day needing to protect ourselves truly
Yeah.
physically. And now it's this new kind of protection that we work beyond
Yeah.
and past. What is it that you think our minds are trying to protect us from now? Because I do think for me, anytime I step into, I'll use your beautiful language, the innate self, and I feel that alignment with the universal, or some sort of spiritual spark, or just the breadth and depth of the mystery, it feels like a homecoming. It doesn't feel scary, and
Mm-hmm.
yet the mind is protecting us.
Mm-hmm.
What's it protecting us from?
It's such a great and loaded question. And part of the reason I talk about the mind as the frenemy and that we have these internal roommates is it shows up with different voices to protect us from different things. The bottom line, I would say, is it's trying to protect us from what perceived danger. But what's interesting about the world that we live in today is that perceived danger could be reputational. It could be like, I don't want to say something that makes me sound stupid because I don't want people to think of me that way. Like, that's a thing our mind tries to protect us from. Our mind's trying to protect us from being gullible. And I think I talk a little bit about how I think, culturally, it's easy. We've gotten into a pattern where it may be easier for us to not believe something than to believe something. And I think that that's that. I don't want to be caught gullible. I don't want to be perceived, and or I don't want the gotcha moment. And so I'm not going to believe in the mystery. I'm going to believe in the things I know and the things I understand and the things that are proven. And it's understandable. It's just very limiting, I think, to think that that it's all that you have to know everything in order for it to be true. And that's the part I feel like, we are, if you step into nature's a beautiful example to me because we're still discovering so much. Like, there are still so many species of things we do not know. And there's a beautiful thinker, and she does a really great work in biomimicry called Janine Benyus. And what she does is she essentially looks at how natural things work in the world and then helps organizations figure out how to work parroting what's happening in nature. And what's really interesting, if you look into the research, is like, nature is so interconnected. I mean, like, from even the way that tree roots work, they're all interconnected, and they send each other signals. And so, like, if one tree gets sick, or if there's a fire that's coming, they literally send each other signals through the root system, and it's just really powerful. But we didn't know that until, like, not very long ago. So there's like all these mysteries that if we expect that we know them, and knowing them means that they're true, we miss out on so much of what life has to offer. And I think nature is such a beautiful example of life's mysteries. that we can learn from if we tap in and remind ourselves that in some ways the world knows so much more than we do. Like creation has, it's so masterfully made, and it has so much to teach us, but we have to put ourselves in a receptive mode and lower some of that barrier of that the mental rigor we try to put around understanding everything.
Yeah, yeah, and just be and allow and feel.